I'm joined by Elizabeth Lowe, director of Stray. And Elizabeth, thank you for your time. It's good to have one of your films back at the festival. I know 5 or 6 years ago we had a short that you co-directed, Treasure Island. So thanks again for being back.
No, it's thrilling to be back, and I'm so glad to have this conversation with you now, even though it's over Zoom.
I know this is a different way to do things, but as you mentioned before we started recording, one of the great takeaways of this is that people can watch this film with their pets, with their dogs. So
Yeah, totally. And then we actually started a social media campaign where you can tag at Stray Doc Film and also say hashtag Stray Watch Party, filming your dog watching the film and reacting to it. Like that's been one of the highlights of this whole experience, releasing the film virtually, seeing the way dogs react to the street dogs in the film.
that's incredible. And speaking of this, very common question that we do ask filmmakers is how they find their subjects. And it's so much more interesting to ask that question for this film. So start off by talking about how you came across Zeytin and what made her stand out.
So I had arrived in Istanbul to make the film. And because I had done research about Istanbul and realized they had these really incredible laws where you can't kill dogs and you can't keep them in captivity. And so when we arrived, we really wanted to be open to the experience of the city and dogs that had charisma. Um, and Zeynep Koprulu, my co-producer, and I were wandering through this really busy underground tunnel packed with people. And suddenly we see these two gigantic dogs like weaving between people's legs, with a real sense of purposefulness, like they were headed somewhere. And we were really intrigued, like, where are these dogs going? What is driving them to be in such a hurry? And it turned out that they were on the heels of these young Syrian men who become a part of the film in their on and off again relationship with Zeytin. And that was partly why Zeytin and Nazar are cast in the film. But the primary reason I think that Zeytin emerges as the star is that she was such a stubborn and independent dog that, unlike all the other dogs that we filmed with, she was able to completely, almost sometimes, ignore me and allow me to just follow her. And she would take me to like these unexpected corners of the city that I would never think to go to myself, whereas other dogs would end up following us back, which kind of sort of undermined the whole premise and promise of the film, which is to allow a dog's will and agency to guide you to places that our human will might not have taken us.
Well, and tell us too, how long were you filming, and was it long enough that you did feel like you created somewhat of a bond with Zeytin or even any of the other uh, dogs that you were following and filming?
Yeah, we filmed over 6 months over the course of 3 years, from 2017 to 2019. And I definitely feel like a simpatico with Zeytin and Nazar, and even Kartal, even though Kartal, it was pretty dramatic what happened with Kartal. It was really interesting because at first I thought it was just me observing her life, and being really her just kind of ignoring me. But then I kind of found out in the middle of the shoot, there are scenes in the film where she's behaving in a way that feels unordinary, like when she sits down in the middle of traffic, or when she suddenly gets up on a busy street and starts barking towards me at the camera. And both those instances, I realized she had been observing me, and realized that when she had wandered into the traffic and plopped down, I was filming it with a sense of, wow, this is an amazing tableau. And so she could read that that scene was giving me pleasure, even though, of course, it was a calculated risk. I knew she wasn't in real danger, and so did she. And then when she starts barking at the camera in one of the scenes where she's in a busy street, it's because there's a guy behind me bothering me. And so she was actually defending me. And so that was, I think, our relationship. She was quite attentive to me, even though I wasn't responsible for her, and she wasn't accountable to me either, in the way that pets are. But it was a really, for me, a beautiful relationship where it was really two people coming together, two persons coming together on our own terms.
Well, and you mentioned her sitting in traffic. And that was another thing. I was a nervous wreck watching some of those scenes as she is navigating through these highways. And then I realized, okay, there's a camera operator attached to this as well. So, you know, you directed the film, but you also shot the footage. And so talk about that. What was your visual approach going into this and telling this story kind of from the dog's point of view?
For me, from the very beginning, I knew that if I was going to make a film about a stray dog's experience of the world, I owed it to my participants who don't speak, and this film doesn't speak for them, hopefully, to at least visually and technically try to figure out a rig that would allow me to constantly film them at dog's height, at 2 feet above ground, because I think it's hugely important to perceive the world in this slightly defamiliarized off angle, because I don't know what it does for audiences, but I think there's some kind of profound effect where it's challenging conventional modes of seeing and removing yourself from a purely anthropocentric worldview where humans are at the center. And in terms of filming those kinds of scenes with them, I surrendered to the intelligence of dogs. I figured if they've survived this long on the streets of Istanbul, which is so much traffic, so many people, that they know what they're doing. And it was always the case with Zeytin. Even as she was dashing across traffic, she knew what she was doing, and I would just follow her and have faith that it would all work out, which it always did.
Well, you capture it beautifully, and you know, not only you know Zeytin and the other strays, but also the reactions of the public. And that's the other thing I wanted to touch on. It was so interesting to see public reaction to these stray dogs. So you touch on it in the film, but talk a little more about that too, just the differences in culture, say in Istanbul
Mm-hmm.
versus even here in the US. And the fact that these, you know, these strays are so well socialized as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge difference in culture and how dogs are treated. I think dogs in Istanbul are communally cared for. They may not have owners, but everybody is kind of invested in their welfare. Like off camera, when I would try to put collars on dogs to put mini GPS trackers on them so I would be able to find them the next day, people always interrupted us, very concerned, asking, "What are you doing with these dogs? They belong here to this community. You can't take them away." So that to me was really striking. That, and throughout the film, you see people petting them, feeding them, just taking a lot of comfort in their presence and being very tolerant, even of nuisance-like behaviors, which also struck me as like, wow, what does that say about a society that they tolerate mobs of dogs fighting with each other and like, you know, creating ruckus? And the most that they do in this case was spray them down with water. So I find it was really fascinating to me, and I wish I personally came from a culture that was tolerant of dogs. And after I got back to LA, where there are no stray dogs on the street for the most part, and if there are, people will report it to animal control. um, I I wish that our streets were filled with dogs who could live life on their own terms and be communally fed and cared for in the way that they are in Turkey.
Well, and that was another thing about that too was, you know, yeah, they seem to have no trouble finding food or shelter or being taken care of. I mean, that was the other interesting thing.
Yeah,
Um,
early on,
yeah.
I tried to bribe Zeytin with, you know, yummy treats to try to make her wake up, you know, so that we could begin production. But that never worked because she was so fulfilled and nourished that, you know, she could find such a rich diet throughout the city. There was nothing I could give her that would be better than what she could find on her own.
What was your relationship like with the boys too, who you kind of came in contact with?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it was the dogs that led me to the boys, and the narrative is always hung on Zayton's experience, and that was really important for the film, for the boys' story not to overtake this dog story, because of course there's a great temptation for us as humans to gravitate towards other human stories, but I wanted the film to step away from that. But with the boys, I I think our ethical dilemma actually came we took it very seriously when Kartal was stolen. At the time, I actually didn't know that they were planning to steal Kartal, and Zayton happened to be recording it on the GoPro that we had strapped onto her that day, which is where that footage of the heist kind of comes from. And after they took the puppy from its mother, we could see that Kartal was suffering under the care of the boys. And we did wonder, do we return this puppy to the construction site, or do we even try to adopt the puppy in? But then all these questions of these young men are also displaced and suffering on the streets. Who are we to take this puppy away from them? Who knows what the emotional impact would be? I think in terms of like what we could do for the young men, we are trying to host impact screenings now that will raise funds for the refugees, but for refugees in Istanbul. But I mean, at the time, it felt like what we could do for them was give them clothes and share meals with them. But I mean, it's an infrastructure issue. It feels like something that feels really large, and we weren't totally sure how to change that situation. And the boys are still living the same life right now.
And that does lead to my next question, which is, do you have people on the ground in Istanbul that have sent you updates about the boys, but even about Zeytin and any of the other strays that you were following?
Yeah, I regularly get snapshots from Zeynep's phone, she lives in Istanbul, and will regularly come across either the young men or Zeytin sleeping on the streets as per usual. So life is very much the same, it seems. I was very worried during the pandemic that there would be issue with how the dogs would be able to survive on the streets, because they feed off of people's scraps, and when there's lockdowns, maybe there's no scraps. But the government stepped up, and they have feeding stations where they regularly, every day, they put out kibble for all the stray animals, which struck me as no surprise, given what I had observed about Turkish society and their relationship with strays.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you again for your time. And before we close, is there anything else you would like to add about the film and what you hope that audiences gain from it?
I think for me, the greatest transformation that I experienced in the making of this film was, I went into this film thinking stray dogs are a tragic thing, that this is a document of people who live, or persons who live, without security and status in the world. But what I found in Turkey was the exact opposite, that it's actually cities that don't have stray dogs that are inhumane and intolerant, because if you don't have stray dogs living on the streets, it actually means you're either incarcerating them or killing them at mass rates. And I hope that this film and the portrait that it shows of dogs being very well integrated into the urban fabric makes people question their own cultural assumptions of what's humane and what's not humane in terms of our relationships with other species.
Well, the film is Stray, and again, Elizabeth Lowe, thank you so much for sharing it with our audience, and thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.